Ahead. Clang, clang, Maxwell Silver hammer made sure that John...
Hey, you've watched the documentary called Get Back, right?
Yes, 3 or 4 times at least we've talked about this before.
But have you ever watched the big guy standing off to the side, doing all sorts of chores like playing the tambourine, hitting anvils, and setting off alarm clocks?
You're talking about Mal Evans, right?
Yes, we are.
Because once you actually look for him, you cannot miss him in that footage.
Exactly. He's just this massive bloke, right? Like 6'6".
Out like a truck.
Yeah, built like a truck, thick eyeglasses, and he's usually just holding a clipboard or scribbling down lyrics in the background.
And grinning. I mean, that's the thing that always stands out to me. He just looks like he is having the absolute time of his life.
Completely. That joy was genuine. People called him the invisible architect of their entire world. But he started out in a totally different place. He was actually just a telephone engineer in Liverpool.
Right. He used to spend his lunch breaks down at the Cavern Club, just, eating his lunch and watching them play.
So just imagine that scenario for a second. You're this blue-collar guy working on telephone lines, eating a sandwich in this sweaty basement club, watching them before they were the global phenomenon, and suddenly George Harrison spots you in the crowd.
Which says a lot about George's intuition, I think. He liked him because despite being this absolute monolith of a man, he had a very gentle demeanor.
Yeah.
So George recommended him as a bouncer for the Cavern, which make perfect logical sense.
Oh, sure. If you need someone to manage a rowdy crowd in a tiny underground club, a 6'6" telephone engineer is going to be your best bet.
Definitely. But within a year, he wasn't just bouncing at the club anymore. He became their road manager, their personal assistant, and essentially their bodyguard.
And he loved every single second of it. There's a quote where he said, being around the band was better than food and drink.
Better than food and drink. I mean, that level of dedication defined his whole life. He wasn't just an employee to them. He was a true believer.
Yeah, and that belief was tested pretty early on, wasn't it? Let's talk about the stories from the road because they are just legendary.
We have to talk about the windshield incident.
Oh, absolutely. This is January 1963, so touring wasn't private jets and luxury hotels yet.
And it was a brutal winter. One of the coldest on record in the UK.
Right. So they're in this old van, and he is driving them from London back to Liverpool in the dead of night. Freezing cold. And suddenly, smash.
A pebble kicks up and hits the windshield.
The whole thing shatters. Now, you or I, especially back in 1963 with no cell phones, we'd pull over, right? The van is compromised. The wind is howling.
You literally cannot see out of the spiderweb cracks.
But not our guy. He looks at the shattered glass, realizes he can't drive like that, and instead of stopping, he just punches out the remaining jagged shards with his bare fist.
Bare fist.
Then he takes off his bowler hat, wraps it around his bleeding hand to shield it from the wind, and just keeps driving.
For 200 miles.
200 miles!
In freezing fog.
With no windshield, taking a 60-mile-per-hour gale directly to the face.
And think about the guys in the back. To stay warm with all that sub-zero air rushing in, they literally piled on top of each other.
The famous Beatle sandwich.
Exactly. Paul McCartney talked about that. They had a single bottle of whiskey to pass around just to keep their blood moving, and their driver just took the hit and got them home.
Didn't complain once, didn't ask for a medal. He was the shield taking the cold so they could stay warm. And that reliability, it translated perfectly from the road straight into the recording studio.
This is the part of the story I find most fascinating. We usually think of roadies as just the guys moving the amps or tuning the guitars.
Yep.
But he was effectively embedded in the recording process. There's a real, tangible musical presence there.
The Mal sound. If you listen closely to the albums, you are physically hearing him.
Let's look at A Day in the Life on Sgt. Pepper. It's widely considered their ultimate masterpiece.
Oh, without a doubt.
You have that incredible middle section where the orchestra goes totally chaotic, building up from nothing into this massive crescendo over 24 bars.
It's so intense, it feels like the entire track is falling apart and coming together at the exact same time. But practically speaking, recording that section was a complete nightmare.
Because the session musicians were told to start at their lowest note and end at their highest. But there was no actual sheet music for the chaos in between.
Right, so they needed to know where they were in the count. They couldn't just guess when the 24 bars were up because the room was getting deafeningly loud.
They needed a human metronome.
And that fell to him.
It did. If you isolate the vocal tracks or even just listen with a really good pair of headphones on the final mix, you can hear his voice. 1, 2, 3.
Just counting it out.
Yeah, his voice gets swallowed up by the orchestra eventually, but he's standing right there by a microphone, guiding the entire chaotic swell.
And didn't he also set off an alarm clock?
He did. At the very end of that 24-bar count, he triggered a mechanical, old-school alarm clock. It was literally just meant to be a marker for the musicians to stop.
A placeholder.
Exactly, a technical placeholder. They fully planned to edit it out later, but then Paul realized it fit perfectly with his next vocal line.
Woke up, fell on a bed.
Spot on. The alarm clock rings, and Paul immediately starts singing about waking up. It was a total accident that became this crucial, iconic narrative element of the track.
His timing was accidental, but it was just absolutely perfect. And then staying on A Day in the Life, there's the final chord.
The E major chord, probably the most famous final chord in music history. It lasts for 53 seconds.
It just rings out forever. It never seems to end.
To get that sustained sound, they needed pure volume and density. So they brought in 3 pianos. John, Paul, Ringo, and producer George Martin were all man in the keys.
But they needed a 5th person, right?
Yes, to hit the keys at the exact same millisecond to get that massive initial impact. And that 5th person was him.
So he is literally hands-on for the climax of Sgt. Pepper.
Hands on the keys. He is physically embedded in the track. And it wasn't a one-off thing either. If you go back a bit to Rubber Soul, specifically the track You Won't See Me, there's another amazing moment.
Is that the Hammond organ part?
Yeah. Song needed this sustained, thick texture underneath the vocal melody. Not a complex riff, just a single, long-held tone on the organ.
But on a Hammond, you have to physically hold the key down to sustain the note, right?
Exactly. And none of the band members wanted to just sit there holding one key down for 3 straight minutes. They wanted to play the fun stuff, the guitars, the harmonies.
So they all turn and look at their road manager.
They look at him, and he sits down and holds that single note for the entire duration of the song. He wasn't trying to improvise or show off. He just had the patience to hold the texture together.
I love that so much. It's this attitude of, I'm not the star, but the star doesn't shine unless I hold this button down.
And then sometimes his contributions were a bit more eccentric, being for the benefit of Mr. Kite.
The circus song.
John wanted a very specific atmosphere for that one. He said he wanted to smell like sawdust. He wanted it to sound like a Victorian fairground.
Slightly sinister, very chaotic.
At that vibe, they decided to use bass harmonicas.
Now, those are massive instruments.
Huge. They look like old car radiators.
Yeah.
And they require an incredible amount of breath to play. So he and Neil Aspinall, the other key aide to the band, both grabbed these giant bass harmonicas.
And they just went for it.
They blew different notes at the exact same time to create this swirling, slightly dissonant wash of sound underneath the track.
So that low, wheezing, heavy circus sound isn't a synthesizer or a tape loop. It's 2 roadies turning purple, trying to push air through harmonicas.
It is the oral equivalent of a carnival, physically created by the 2 men who carried the carnival on their backs for years.
That is just wild. Okay, so we have the Hammond organ, the counting, the bass harmonica, but we have to talk about the anvil, because when anyone thinks of him in the Get Back documentary, they think of the anvil.
Maxwell's silver hammer.
Right. Paul has this upbeat song about a serial killer, and he wants a literal clang-clang sound. He wants a real blacksmith's anvil.
And because he's the guy who gets things done, he doesn't just go find a sound effects record. He goes out and sources a legitimate, heavy cast iron blacksmith's anvil and drags it into Twickenham Film Studio.
The footage is so great. He's sitting there in this little folding chair. His legs are crossed. This massive anvil is right in front of him, and he's holding a hammer. And every time the chorus hits, bang, bang.
And he's smiling the whole time.
Grinning ear to ear. He looks like a kid in a candy store, except the candy is, heavy industrial equipment.
There is a bit of a historical debate about this, though, which we should mention.
Oh, right. The recording controversy. Because what we see in the film is just the rehearsal.
Correct. When they finally went into the studio to record the album version for Abbey Road, which was months after those film rehearsals, the official credits get murky. A lot of reference books actually credit Ringo Starr with playing the anvil on the final record.
Really? Ringo?
That's the official line in several places. However, the recording engineer, Jeff Emmerich, tells a very different story.
What does he say?
He claims that Ringo tried to do it, but simply didn't have the arm strength to get that sharp, piercing clang sound consistently. You have to hit solid iron incredibly hard to make it ring. Emmerich says they had to call him back in to record it because he was the only guy in the room with the muscle to make the anvil sing.
I am absolutely going with Emmerich's version on this one. I mean, look at the guy.
Well, regardless of whose hammer actually struck the metal on the final master take, the consensus is that the part belongs to him. He found the anvil, he created the rhythm during those rehearsals, and he played it for months before the red light ever went on. The musical idea was his.
Another perfect example of the invisible architect at work. But for a long time, we only knew about all this physical stuff. The driving, the lifting, the hammering. Recently, we've learned there was a much more intellectual side to his contributions, all thanks to the diaries.
This is such a heartbreaking and fascinating discovery. He kept diaries throughout his entire time with the band. For decades, historians thought they were lost forever.
And then they just turned up.
Found in a trunk in a basement in New York and finally published in 2023.
And they show he wasn't just fetching tea or fighting off rabid fans.
Far from it. He was often the designated scribe in the room. As the guys were jamming and coming up with lyrics, just shouting out random lines, he was the one furiously writing them down. He was almost always the very first person to see a finished song on paper.
Just think about what an incredible position that is, to be the sole witness to the birth of Let It Be or Hey Jude.
But it went way beyond just witnessing. The diaries reveal he actually helped write some of the lyrics.
Really?
Yeah. For example, he notes that he was in the room with Paul working on fixing a hole and actually contributed lines to the finished song.
Did he get a songwriting credit?
No. And that's the real tragedy of the business side of the story.
Yeah.
He noted in his diary that he was promised royalties for his specific contributions to Sgt. Pepper. He genuinely believed he was going to be compensated as a songwriter, or at least a credited contributor.
And I'm guessing that didn't happen.
He never received a single penny of royalties. Think about this. At the absolute height of Beatlemania, while the band members were becoming multimillionaires, buying country estates and Rolls Royces, he was earning a weekly wage of £38.
38 pounds a week while helping literally create a day in the life.
It's a staggering contrast. And to add insult to injury, decades later, a single lyric sheet written in his handwriting sold at auction for $192,000.
Wow. So the paper he scribbled on was worth an absolute fortune, but the man doing the scribbling was struggling to get by.
The cultural value of his work was astronomical, but the man himself was living paycheck to paycheck compared to the people he was serving.
That's just tough to hear. It really changes how you look at that huge smile in the documentary. He did it purely for the love of the band.
He did. But that love didn't protect him when the whole thing fell apart.
Yeah, let's get into the post-breakup era, because he didn't just disappear overnight, but he definitely struggled to find his footing.
He tried to carve out a new life in the music industry. He actually discovered the band Badfinger.
Oh, wow, I didn't realize that was him.
Yeah. He brought them to Paul, who ended up signing them to Amel Records. He even produced some of their early tracks. He clearly had a great ear and knew what worked in the studio.
But the breakup of the core band was just so messy, and he ended up getting caught in the crossfire.
He became a casualty of the Apple Corps collapse. He was fired by Alan Klein, the manager who was brought in to clean house. He was eventually reinstated, but as the whole organization kept shrinking, he was slowly edged out. The family he had dedicated his entire adult life to was just dissolving in front of him.
So he moves to Los Angeles to try and start over?
He did. He separated from his wife, Lily, which was a massive emotional blow to him, and he fell into a very deep depression. He was hanging out on the periphery of the LA music scene, with Harry Nelson and John Lennon's Lost Weekend crowd, but he was just drifting.
And this leads us to that terrible day in January 1976.
January 4th. He was actively working on a memoir titled Living the Beatles Legend. He was actually supposed to deliver the manuscript that very month, but his mental state was deteriorating, and he was heavily medicated.
He had a rifle in his apartment, right?
Yeah. He had an air rifle. Not a firearm, but a pellet gun. He was in a really bad state, confusing reality. His girlfriend called the police simply thinking they could help de-escalate the situation and calm him down.
Yeah.
But when the police arrived, they saw the gun. They didn't know it was an air rifle, or perhaps they just didn't want to take the chance. And they shot him.
Just like that.
4 times. He was only 40 years old.
That is just devastating. The guy who protected them from mobs, who took the little punches for them, who drove them through the freezing snow, he ends up alone in a room in LA, killed by the people who were called to help him.
And the tragedy somehow didn't even end with his death. There's a final, incredibly cruel twist involving his ashes.
Oh, God, I remember this part. They were mailed back to England, weren't they?
Yes, his ashes were sent by post back to his family in the UK, but they got lost in the postal system. They essentially just vanished.
I heard John Lennon made a joke about it at the time, but it was just so dark.
It was a classic Lennon defense mechanism, using brutal humor to cover up deep pain. When John heard the ashes were lost in the mail, he said they should check the dead letter file.
Oof. That is bleak.
It is. But if you step back and look at the whole picture, it perfectly summarizes the tragedy of his life. He was the man who spent a decade ensuring 4 other people got exactly where they needed to be, on time, safely, every single day. But in the end, he couldn't find his own way home.
That's a really powerful way to put it. You know, people always throw around the title of the 5th Beatle. We constantly hear names like George Martin, Brian Epstein, maybe even Pete Best.
And those are completely valid arguments.
Yeah.
George Martin obviously shaped the sonic landscape, and Brian Epstein sold the image to the world. But the guy we're talking about today, he was the heartbeat. He was the one actually there.
Every single tour.
Every session,
Yeah.
every crisis. If they needed a broken guitar string replaced, he had it. If they needed a lyric written down before they forgot it, he wrote it. If they needed a heavy iron anvil, he found it.
His voice is literally on the records. His physical strength powered the performances.
And he did it all for 38 pounds a week, just for the pure joy of being in the room with them.
The ultimate invisible architect. And I think, thanks to the documentary footage and the recent discovery of his diaries, he's finally becoming a little less invisible to the rest of us.
I certainly hope so. He absolutely deserves to be seen.
Next time I listen to A Day in the Life, I'm not just going to be listening for John and Paul. I'm going to listen closely for that count. 1, 2, that's him.
And that massive 53-second E major chord. That's him too.
Well, thanks for joining us today. Whenever you feel like knowing more about the Beatles, visit us at BeatlesRewind.com. It's the Beatles, all day, every day, 8 days a week. Cats will do it again tomorrow.
Yeah, you bet. See you then.
Until next time, when you listen.
Your mind hits his own anvil.